Thank you, Ian, and kia ora tātou. It's wonderful to be back here again and to actually see NZEI's leadership coming back into the room to refocus on what is some of the most significant challenges that NZEI and the teaching profession have faced in this country for at least 20 or 30 years. And indeed, it's nothing more than an assault on quality public education, and I think we need to see it that way. And the unfortunate fact is that everything that we've predicted in the various speeches that I and others have made has come to pass, but in fact what's come to pass is even more than what we predicted, and we need to be pleased that we predicted it, and we need to recognise the fact that there's more to come. And that this attack really began with Anne Tolley, and that came through in the 2011 election policy of the National Government, and as we found out subsequently Act, and it's now fully underway. So what I'm going to cover are some of the politics of that situation and the challenges that face us. And I refuse to call what's happening threats. I call it instead challenges. They are in fact challenges because they challenge us not just to defend our values but to assertively promote them, and so it sits to us to respond to that. But I want to first of all, before I go on, refer to Christchurch and quite frankly what a cynical use of a crisis situation to drive a right-wing agenda for education reform. Both in substance and in process, this government has got the reshape of education in Christchurch completely wrong. There is no enunciated vision for education across Christchurch. There's no context for schools and centres to work with their communities on a desirable shape for local education in that city and in that community, and there's no sensible process that joins up early childhood, primary, secondary and tertiary, or joins up the provision of services across the city. Instead, what's left we have a process that makes the Kim.com affair look orderly. There is a germ agenda underlying what's happening in Christchurch, and as such, NZEI must and is exert leadership in bringing the sector and the community together to oppose this agenda. That is our mission inside NZEI. We're doing that already with Sandra and her leadership team, and we will continue to do that, to join up those groups that the Ministry and cynically the Minister of Education has left completely isolated, trying to work in disaggregated, atomised units without any overarching context about what education in that city and in that community needs to look like. And as NZEI, of course, we're going to save jobs down there. We're going to save schools, we're going to save centres, and we will save public education in Christchurch. But most importantly of all, to everyone in this room, and I know it's the most important, we will rescue the learning of Christchurch children. Moving on, I want to say we're not alone in this struggle for quality public education. Here and overseas, we join hands with fellow unions in staring down this germ agenda, this government education reform movement agenda, and we're going to join with them as we do, vigorously promoting our agenda for quality public education. We're working as closely as we ever have with the PBDA. As Angelo has pointed out, we are very, very tight with the Australian Education Union that's facing problems we face, and through Education International, EI, we are linking with other global education unions in the struggle. We all recognise this is about politics. While we pursue our legitimate industrial and professional aims together, and we pursue them as hard as we ever have, without a sympathetic and progressive political climate, we will struggle to make progress. The global financial crisis has shifted politics further to the right at the very time, and this is the great irony of this, at the very time when narrow, self-interested policies of the right have clearly failed across the globe. For some reason, the progressive left, and I'm sure everyone in this room would put themselves in that group, have failed to fill the vacuum following the global financial crisis, and the right have not just seized that space, but they've again populated it with their narrow, self-interested, competitive and destructive models. And it is in this context we find education overseas and in New Zealand. At the very time when governments across the world and in this country should be investing in education, they're doing the opposite, and our mission simply is to change that. And that will mean shifting the politics of education to our view about what is proper quality public education in New Zealand. NZEI Te Reo has two immediate political objectives. We've talked about this and we'll continue to drive these. Firstly, we have to make education a key vote shifter in the 2014 election, and secondly, have NZEI Te Reo leading that shift. Our polling has shown us that in terms of the first objective about shifting votes around education, we are getting traction. Women are starting to shift their votes. 50% of women are estimated to have voted for the right in the 2011 election. In July 2012, 8-9 months on, that's dropped to 39%. And the key issues for women are asset sales and education. And for women voters about education, they worry about not enough money going into education. Isn't that interesting? Class sizes, ECE going backwards, and quality of what's being taught. Tactically, over the last 18 months, we've focused on that key female demographic. Our whole communication strategy has focused on that. Our television advertising, our radios, our media releases. We knew if we could get the message across to that demographic, they would be sympathetic to our messages and oppositional to those of the right, and that's proven to be correct. So we are making progress on that first front in the prominence of education in the media, and this government's continued attempts to trash quality public education will ensure that that continues. On the second front, on NZEI leadership, our round of forums, the G7, the media prominence and so on shows we're achieving that goal. NZEI is leading that struggle, but we need to deepen and accelerate our leadership across our communities, and that means all of you. And to do this, we need to learn from the class size back down. That raised two immediate questions. Firstly, what led to the government back down? And secondly, did they really back down? Firstly, what led to it? The answer is we achieved a unique alignment of the interests of students, parents, teachers, schools, board of trustees, parents and communities. They were all aligned in opposition, and that was too much for the government. They backed down because they knew they couldn't beat that. The second question, have they really backed down? The answer is they've never said the policy was wrong. In fact, they've said the reverse, that the policy was right. Just the selling and the timing of the policy was wrong. Not the sausage, just the sizzle. The telling point for us really is how the government handled the back down. They didn't retreat. The battle was really over. Who would seize the vacuum that was left? Would the government seize that vacuum, or would we? And the answer is, despite our best efforts with the G7 and other groups, the government won that. And they achieved this by Hekia setting out her cross-sector forum, where she said, we are listening to the community. And as Ian has said earlier, this is a deliberate attempt to marginalise the representative voices in education by the cynical use of evidence that the best way of affecting education reform is to genuinely engage with the sector. And we know that that works. We've seen that work in other education jurisdictions around the globe, that whole question of genuine engagement with the sector. And the fact is, they got that right, except that they get the genuine right. Through that process that Ian spoke about last night, when he talked about what actually goes on in Hekia's cross-sector forum, we see that the government is actually rolling out an extreme right-wing education reform agenda, the GERM. There is no accident. They went hard on the data first in that cross-sector forum. They went hard on national standards, on league tables, PAI and so on. They went after that because they knew that was the key to shifting and creating competition inside schooling. And the government has used a spurious majority in that forum, cynically backed by the political inexperience and naivety of its participants and the minister's own confidence to drive that agenda through, and that's what's happening as we speak through that cross-sector forum. And it's only the voice of NZEI and one or two others that we can gather at any particular time that opposes that. Hekia and the Ministry of Education have refused to engage with NZEI on appraisals, on initial teacher education, pre-principalship qualifications, career pathways. Instead, They intend to drown our legitimate voice with the clamour of a group of sycophants lining up to do the minister's bidding, and if that sounds like shame on those people, that's exactly what it is. And we, as NZEI, and I'd hope the other teacher organisations like PPDA, will never line up with that group. Hekia and her masters, because we need to think what's really happening here, this is Bill English and John Key's agenda. They need to know that NZEI members will not be silenced through forums like that or any other dodgy process they set up when quality public education is threatened. Our members will not go back into their classrooms, into their centres, into their schools when those values are put at risk. NZEI will continue to lead that opposition until that program is reversed, and if it doesn't happen at the next election, well, we're just going to go and fight it on to the next election, until the next election, until we win that. We will shift the politics on education in this country, and we'll shift it back to the values that sit behind a quality public education system. Let's look at the other threats. League tables. Despite all the claims made by Anne Tolley and Leslie Longstone and Hekia Parata that they had no interest in setting up league tables, instead they have actually facilitated and supported the media in developing them, and we have to question the role of the media in this. Despite the ropey, untested, untrialled, unmoderated, inaccurate and downright dangerous national standards, this government has persisted, and the question we have to ask ourselves is why, and the answer is very simple. Because fundamentally this government believes that by introducing competition into New Zealand schooling, they will lift the system, and the tool to creating competition between schools is league tables. Fundamentally, New Zealanders know league tables are unfair, and we know through our research that New Zealanders across the board will oppose them if they see them as unfair. We know through our research that 70% of parents are satisfied with the amount of information they get on their children's progress. And here's a real surprise, 69% of parents believe that in choosing a school, the most important factor is to actually visit the school. Great schools doing wonderful things with student learning in the most difficult of circumstances, and those schools are being publicly named and shamed by direct implication. Their students are labelled as failing. Welcome to the new world of John Key, Bill English, Hekia Parata, the world of winners and losers amongst the most defenceless group in this country, our children. NZEI Te Reo will never accept league tables, and we will create a political climate where it is unacceptable for any political party to promote or allow their use. Charter schools. Why? Why? We've never seen a shred of evidence that charter schools lift system performance anywhere in the world. There is no evidence that they lift the achievement of disadvantaged groups. In fact, the evidence is the other way. In education systems like US and Sweden, that in fact their system performance is going backwards post the introduction of free schools or charter schools or whatever they call them in those countries. The government and Catherine Isaacs, as the chair of that group that brought in charter schools into this country, could not show us a single shred of evidence that they work. Instead, they just plaintively say, as they said to Ian and I, as they said to our forum up in South Auckland a couple of months ago, why doesn't NZEI just give them a go? Mike Feinberg, out here last week promoting the KIP model of charter schools in the States, says we should see them as the research and development department of the Ministry of Education. This is absolutely offensive, to believe that we can put at risk our children's learning and education by just giving them a go. But when you look at the behaviour of their cheerleader, John Banks, maybe we can really understand that better. So why? Does the government really believe that non-registered teachers will make a difference? When Hekia Parata is banging on about teacher quality, and we need to be careful of our language here, we need to not call them unregistered teachers because they're not teachers at all. there are unregistered people standing in front of classrooms. Mike Feinberg told Ian and I that it's okay to have unregistered teachers as they'll still be highly qualified, like Teach America. Well, Mike, if they're so good, why do they leave KIPP schools in droves? And while we're with you, Mike, why do 30% of students in KIPP schools drop out by year 9? And that goes up to 40% of Afro-Americans. And why do students in KIPP schools get $18,500 per head versus $11,000 in public schools? Tell us that, Mike, and tell us how that's going to lift achievement across the board in the US. And why doesn't the government tell us that not teaching the curriculum is going to make a difference? Or that non-teaching principles are going to make a difference? That unlimited teaching hours are going to make a difference? Or that not being subject to the Official Information Act is going to make a difference? And lastly, this question I put to you, what makes this government believe that being able to make a profit out of educating kids will make a difference? And maybe, just maybe, profit starts to get to answer the question why. No one's school, and all of you in this room need to be clear of it, no one's school will be immune from the impact of charter schools. Doesn't matter how much you and your board and your principals may say, we're not going to be a charter school, you will not be immune. Competition that is created by charter schools will impact your school and will impact your school immediately. It will change your school's behaviour. That's simply how competition works. And if you don't believe it, think what it's going to be like the first time the school bus comes past your gates loaded with kids going off to the charter school. Is that going to make you change? Absolutely it will. Charter schools will be rammed into our education system. They're doomed to succeed. NZEI, our members, our parents and our communities must make charter schools marginal, the wacky fringe of education in this country, so an incoming government can easily abolish them. And finally, remember our existing system already is very flexible. So why? Charter schools have no place in New Zealand's education system. There is no place for the competition they create, and there's no place for the inevitable privatisation and profit-taking that follows in their wake. There was no political mandate for them, and we will continually campaign to expose them for what they are and get rid of them. What about support staff, the forgotten army, what I call now the price takers of our education system? Folk who bear the brunt of all the funding cuts. Think about it, in the budget, Bill English, 2% increase in the ops grant, out of which our support staff is supposed to take a living wage. And even then we find out that schools have to now pay super for ops grant funded staff out of that paltry 2% increase. We know the public are with us in our struggle for support staff. 77% believe there should be more funding for teacher aides. Mike Feinberg, remember him, says KIPP schools have fewer support staff to free up resources for teachers. No one will ever convince me that charter schools in New Zealand will be more generous with support staff. Absolutely no way. We've made ground for support staff, but we've got a whole lot more to do. We've still got no career paths for our support staff members. There's still no sensible remuneration and recognition system, and there's still no central funding. So we're back on the road again for support staff, taking their issues to the community and campaigning not just for their rights, but for their rightful place in New Zealand's quality public education system. And we will change the politics of funding around support staff. Early childhood education. We don't need to remind anyone of the value of early childhood education. Even the government pays lip service to it. But the reality is we spend way less than other developed economies on early childhood education. 0.4% of GDP versus a recommended 1%. We need to spend more, much more, and we strongly reject targeting as a mechanism for the delivery of quality early childhood education. Equity of access doesn't mean depriving many to enhance the few. We need to lift and focus on the all. This government has shown no sign of reinstating the 100% target. 80% is good enough. We fought for that 100% target, for the policies and funding to support it, and will continue to fight for it. Centres that have done the right thing and kept 100% are now being heavily penalised in the competitive marketplace that is early childhood education. They have to make cuts or increase fees in the face of competition from employers that are happy to exploit that competitive advantage of employing unqualified teachers. We will continue to pursue the 100% qualified, but we've got to be realistic. We must remember we need more members in early childhood education. Our low levels are preventing our voice being heard, and our influence is not as it should be. We've committed to a 5-year campaign to address these issues, to lift our membership, build our professional place, and engage widely with our allies in the sector. What about our bargaining? Well, very simply, we're just being toyed with. We've put up a serious claim for a remuneration and recognition system that builds on the collegiality of schools to advance quality public education. However, as our negotiators will later report to you, we're being met with a response that essentially lays the groundwork for competition within schools and between schools. So there's a real tension now developing between our collegial view of how schools should operate and their competitive view of what's good for schooling. And there's no place to hide in this. No one in this room can hide from this any longer. The government claims are designed to create a competitive platform within each school, that is, teacher against teacher, principal against teachers. And if you have any doubt at all, just remember what Hekia said in the Dom Post, where she says she's keen to see performance-based pay located in the overall context of quality management in schools. National standards, to quote, could help schools understand who they need to employ and help set targets for teachers. And for those of you who are support staff, special ed and early childhood, don't worry about it, you're next. There is no evidence that performance-based pay works in schooling. Indeed, to the contrary, the OECD say in school systems with teacher pay at our levels, performance-based pay is associated with poorer system performance. It doesn't work, and yet this government still persists. The public doesn't believe it works. 53% in our polling disagree with the statement that teacher pay should be tied to national standard results. So the public doesn't believe it works. The OECD doesn't believe it works. Teachers know it won't work. So what's the credibility of Key and Parata when they say it will work? Their stated confidence, of course, is backed by that proponent of free schools in England, and is now the Secretary of Education. And I'd have to be quite frank with you, when we see the questions that were put to the Minister yesterday by Jan Tanetti from a Decile 1 school at Tauranga, you'll see the level of antagonism that exists between that competitive view of schooling and the collegial collaborative view of schooling that has built up the success that is in Jan's school. We must strongly promote our model, our collaborative model that builds on the strengths of working together in the face of a drive for more competition in schooling. And we know our parents and communities support us in that, but they won't support us in that if you, as teachers, principals and support staff, do not get out there and talk to them. We know our parents don't want their children used as guinea pigs in some sort of high-stakes performance-based pay system designed as a payback for teachers. Teachers and principals need to come out of their schools, out of their centres, out of their classrooms and say it courageously that the sort of thing that's being dished up is unacceptable. It will destroy children's learning in this country and it will destroy our quality public education system. And our response to this is our Schools campaign that we've talked about earlier, and you'll see all over the web, and that the new early childhood education campaign that we're working on. But having said all that, I still haven't addressed what I believe is the real elephant in the room in this conversation. And that which makes me as a New Zealander quite frankly sick to the heart, that it's been allowed to happen in this country. And that's the elephant in the room is child poverty. and the associated gross disparity of incomes. And you know this because you face this every day in your workplace, in your schools and centres. You face the casualties of child poverty and do your best to deal with it. Can you really believe that there are 270,000 children living in poverty in New Zealand, and predictably twice as bad for Māori and Pacific Island, of course? Can you believe that in this country that was built on principles of fairness and equity, that 270,000 children are estimated to live in poverty? And that a third of that number are the children of the working poor, parents who are in employment but are still living in poverty. Can you believe that in this country, New Zealand, Aotearoa, the discredited policies of the right have allowed that to happen? And New Zealanders have sat silent while it happened? And that the right actually want more? That it hasn't finished? That's not satisfactory? Can anyone here not want to change that? And the government's response to that? Well, we can't measure child poverty because people move in and out of poverty every day. Thank you, Paula Bennett. Thank you for the right view about what must be the most significant issue facing this country. And what about income disparity? The Ministry of Social Development, working back to June 2011, found that income inequality was the highest it's ever been in New Zealand. The median income for New Zealanders has dropped 3% in real terms since 1990, with stronger drops predictably for Māori and Pacific Island. But, hello, the top third went up and the bottom third went down. If that sounds like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, that's exactly what it's about. This government has declared that sort of warfare on New Zealanders. Can we afford to sit silent while that happens? In OECD terms, we are one of the most unequal societies in the OECD. What became of that dream of fairness and equity in this country? And you know, and we know, because the evidence shows it, that socio-economic effects, what the child takes to the classroom or the centre, is responsible for the greatest variability in student achievement. Did we hear Hekia talk about that yesterday? Do we hear anything other than lip service about it? Do you see the government even acknowledging it, let alone doing something about that? No, what do we get instead? Benefit bashing? Further attacks on collective bargaining and unions? Tax cuts for the rich? Asset sales to their mates? And so it goes on. And daily, more children slip into poverty. What a poverty of an imagination and sympathy from this government. And against that statistic, I put to you as teachers, as principals and support staff, you're doing a heroic job. And your reward from the Minister and her friends, you've been told you're the problem. Well, that's going to come to an end, and NZEI Te Reo is going to lead that charge. We as citizens can no longer sit on the sidelines. We must get angry as the most defenceless in society are exposed to the brutal effects of the right-wing agenda. There isn't a place to hide. The cones of silence that exist around our schools and our centres have got to be lifted, and our voices need to be heard throughout the country. 50,000 of them and more saying this has got to stop. It's finished. And I tell you, I'm angry. I'm angry about the Minister patronising and diminishing us and our cause. I'm angry about the way our quality public education system's being trashed. I'm angry about 270,000 kids living in poverty. And I'm angry about New Zealand having one of the biggest divides between rich and poor. And I get especially angry when I see the educational success of our children threatened by the greedy and self-interested actions of a few. I know you share that anger. I know you're committed to that change. It must be about the children. Thank you.